have a woefully undersubscribed subreddit. So please do me a favour, if you're a Redditor, head on over to r/postmortem studios and talk about anything related to any of my shenanigans. Peace. Hello lovelies. I increasingly feel like an idiot for backing Kickstarters and crowdfunding projects, and I say that as someone who runs crowdfunding projects and runs into issues while doing so. But I did back the Iron Kingdom's Requiem crowdfunder. I have some issues with big companies who use crowdfunding because it sucks a lot of the potential money and life out of campaigns for smaller independent companies like my own. So this is not what crowdfunding was ever intended for, but still I succumb. Whether that makes me a hypocrite or not, I don't know. Now, I love the Iron Kingdoms as a setting. I have some of the tabletop wargame books, even though I have only ever gotten to play the wargame once using paper counter proxies that I made. I have owned it for 3.5 edition for their own system, and now their 5th edition Reflection. This is another issue that I have with this. They had their own system. It's got a few problems, but it's perfectly adequate, and it is much better suited to representing the Iron Kingdoms than crowbarring the whole thing into D&D ever was. That said, the 3rd edition world books are the best ones for lore and detail, and their own books, while they break down at the higher levels, are the best for representing the kind of skirmish level heroic fast moving combat that they have in their war game in a role-playing game. But nonetheless, I bought this latest incarnation, which is for 5th edition, largely because I felt I could raid it for stuff for the tabletop-less game. But yeah. So what did I get for backing the project? I got some neat little reference cards for the monsters, which have the basic immediate information on the front and the more detailed information on the back. I haven't opened them up yet because I know I'll just end up displacing them. We got some map tiles for combat, which I'm actually pretty disappointed in. I mean, the size is very small. Now, Privateer Press have produced board games based on their properties, which had proper chunky cardstock tile material in them. So compared to that, this was pretty disappointing and unfortunate, shall we say. Again, I haven't bothered opening them up, but I've seen how they're meant to be used and the size of them and so on in the adventure book that came with it, so that was a bit disappointing. We got a nice big map of the world, and it had a whole bunch of new areas and detail in it, reflecting how they've updated the setting and so on through the years, through the different editions. Though, you know, this is your standard paper map that has become, well, has always been the industry standard, but after the Genesis maps with their thick plasticky coating, it feels like this could have been better as well. I have been spoiled by the production quality of Genesis material, so that's that, I suppose. This is the main setting book. I am not going to spend a great deal of time on this because I already reviewed it when I got the PDFs. So this lets you bring everything into 5e, and I don't think anything much has particularly changed here. It lacks the detail on the background that you've got in previous editions, though there is another Kickstarter which I also backed, which maybe will fill out some of that detail and update us on the new areas the new cultures and the new bad guys and things that have been introduced. So maybe we might get a bit more detail there for those of us who don't really follow the war games so much. What I found particularly interesting is that under the races and so on, they have the nations with different traits and things like sub-races. So these are all humans, but they have different sub-race capabilities, which is obviously something that you would have thought would have been banished as being deeply problematic in the current publishing scene. So it's quite interesting to see that brought out. The major update to the setting is this sort of big war with demons, which I thought kind of jumped the shark and was a bit shit compared to the rest of the setting, but you can easily ignore that. And if you run any sort of steampunk, magipunk sort of setting for your 5th edition, as I do, with Tabletopless and Erotech, then there's plenty in this that you can blag and run away with, and give you plenty of other material and opportunities to incorporate that sort of thing into your games. So it might be useful if you're running the setting whose name currently escapes me, with the automata character class and everything. I'm sure it'll occur to me about half an hour after I finish the video. Yeah, I'm actually not very well at all lately, so that may explain why my brain is a bit fuzzy. But yeah, I already reviewed it as a PDF. I mean, the book, it's nice production quality, their artwork is as great as always, but there's not a lot extra to say about this book that I haven't already said. I don't think 5e was a particularly good fit. I don't think 3rd edition was a particularly good fit for the Iron Kingdoms. I'm disappointed that they didn't put more support into their own system, but hey ho, here we are. You can rip stuff off from this for your own campaign as appropriate, and there's some interesting character classes and race options and so on. So you know, it does the job, but there's not a lot more to say about that. Now, things I didn't really review before are the Monsternomicon and the little adventure book we got with this. The Monsternomicon has existed across the different editions, apart from their own one. I think they called it something else that time, but there have been monster books in every edition, and they tend to retread the same sort of ground. So this is basically a monster manual of setting appropriate stuff, generally with a conceit that it's all put together by an explorer. There seems to be much more emphasis on the religious aspect when it comes to this edition, so you'll find more angels and demons, which isn't something that I feel is particularly necessarily thematically appropriate to a steampunk / magipunk sort of thing. But again, you can avoid that if you want. Otherwise, I mean, it's a monster manual. It's full of monsters, some of which are iconic to the setting, some of which are particular to the setting. There's some nice options for quasi-mechanical undead, which is useful in particular for me to steal, and so on. Some of the new creatures and monsters from the tabletop skirmish game are included. The artwork's as fantastic as usual. So there's not a lot more to say about this, because it's a monster manual. It's for 5th edition. Their take on dragons is different, very different. So I mean, that kind of says it all. A dragon breathing fire onto a locomotive, kind of, that's the setting in a picture, really. So very interesting as a different take on dragons and the corruption that they spread in the world around them and so forth, which is kind of a medieval sort of spin on dragons in a way, but it's refreshingly different. Let's put it that way. Are there any other particularly noteworthy things? The warjacks, which is the other iconic thing to the setting, sort of steam-powered golems that you can wrangle and command and use. They tend to unbalance encounters in D&D versions, but you can find those more in the main book than in this book. But they are interesting. We have pigmen, not orcs, but pharaoh they're called. I quite like them as bad guys. Waylayers and bushwhackers and so on. Pretty much everything apart from necessarily human opponents from the tabletop game, the skirmish game, can be found here. And conversion from the old 3rd edition material, should you be so inclined, into 5th edition is obviously a bit easier, because D&D basically has the same underpinnings, and it just takes a little bit of thought and a little bit of work to transfer 3rd edition stuff, skipping merrily over 4th edition into 5th edition. So there is still quite a lot of 3rd edition material that you can half-inch and bring across into this material from their own system, which again I bemoan the loss of. Not so much. But that said, there are creatures and things that are common across all editions, including their own systems. So you can use that as a benchmark if you want to convert other things that haven't already been converted. Again, I don't like the demons, so all of this felt like a bit of a waste of space to me, and cheesy and too much and not in keeping with the rest of the setting. But it is what it is, I suppose. Yeah, it's a monster manual. You know what you're getting, but you're getting fantastic art. And the tabletop skirmish game is well worth checking out as well. If you're into, you can fight with big armies, but if you're into something a bit more fast-paced and a bit more skirmish level, like a lot of more recent Games Workshop releases, perhaps trying to compete with Iron Kingdoms, then the skirmish game is well worth checking out as well. Now, besides the monster manual, the last thing I got was this introductory adventure, Legend of the Witchfire. They've revisited this pretty much every time they've put out an edition. Alexia Canor, I think her name is, who can command the undead. Previously, it's felt like the adventures that she's been involved in, the PCs are kind of an also-ran, and that is the case here as well. Events have always seemed very big when it comes to her. In previous editions, when they've done these adventure chains to do with the Witchfire, which is this magical sword that she has, this one felt much smaller, less important, less effectual. If you have been keeping up with the editions over time, there's some nice background elements and so on, but they were forced to kind of depower her, make her less interesting, unfortunately, and it doesn't feel like a continuation of the Witchfire story, even though it is. Here you can see my problem with the maps, in that they're so small that it doesn't really feel worth it. I mean, do you really need anything more than theatre of the mind when you're constricted to such a small area? But yeah, compared to previous Witchfire adventures, this one just feels a bit lackluster and too petty and too small. I mean, it's an introductory adventure, so it's bound to be, but it just doesn't live up to the standards and the hype of the previous Witchfire adventures, and that's unfortunate. So what else is there to say, really? Point scores, I guess. The core book I already reviewed and gave a score to, holding the physical object. Style can't be faulted really. 5. Substance, little bit disappointing. I think I said so before. There's just not enough detail on the richness of the world. If you just want to rate it for mechanics and ideas, that's fine. But if you're a newbie coming into the setting and the world, there's just not really enough there. It's more like a toolkit to bring your Iron Kingdoms games into 5th edition D&D. You know, there are older lore books and so on out there. I don't know if you can still get the PDFs. You might have to hunt them down on eBay or something. But the lore books for the previous editions are much better. Substance 3. So that's 8 out of 10. 4 out of 5. Yeah, it's good for what it is. If you're not into 5th edition, this is not really going to be much use to you, save as a little mini update to the lore. But you might be better off looking at an online wiki or something for that. So yeah, 4 out of 5. The Witchfire Adventure. The presentation is, it's the usual high standard, but not really as good as the core book. So I would say 4 out of 5 for style. In terms of substance, it's just lacking. And you're not even getting particularly any extra monsters or bad guys that you can use, that you can rip off and use later on or independently. You're not getting a lot of that. So in terms of substance, only a 2. So 4 out of 5 for style, 2 out of 5 for substance, 6 out of 10, 3 out of 5, deeply average. Monsternomicon. To me, the demons are and so on are a bit of a waste of space. Most people probably aren't going to feel that way. That's my own hang-up, so I'm not going to mark it down for that. Style here, you get brilliant illustrations, full colour of all of these things. Oh, I miss black and white. The 3rd edition was in black and white, that was muddied by being on a grey background, but sometimes sketches are better. In fact, you can see that in the dragon section, where it looks like an artistic rendering of a dragon by someone in the field, which is quite nice. But I can't really fault the style. 5 out of 5. Substance, I mean, it's all heavily usable. Bits of it aren't particularly useful to me, but that's my own issues. Could have done with some more basic human enemies, the troop types and things from the skirmish game. It would have been nice to have had more of that, or more complete sort of thing, because I think a big part of the appeal of Iron Kingdoms is bringing what you have from the war game onto a more interpersonal level. So I would have liked to have seen that, or more guidelines for that, I guess. So in terms of substance, pushing my own hang-ups aside, I mean, it's all content that you can use, but that there is that glaring omission of the human enemies. So 5 out of 5 for style, 4 out of 5 for substance, 9 out of 10, 4.5 out of 5. There you go, that's the new Iron Kingdoms release. There was a second Kickstarter for another set of books that are related to the frontiers of the Iron Kingdoms world. So that could be a little less lore heavy, even though these books don't necessarily give you the lore that you might need. And it's something new and something a bit more interesting, perhaps, that hasn't been explored before in the Iron Kingdom. Something beyond the skirmishes and wars between the various kingdoms. So I'm looking forward to seeing that when it does come out. But yeah, whirlwind reviews of 5th edition Privateer Press Iron Kingdoms RPG books. There you go, Bosh, sorted. Sang.
Aren't you a little tired of so-called horror media about shiny, sparkly, angsty, whiny monsters. I know I am, and that's why I created Actual Fucking Monsters, where you will play an actual fucking monster doing horrible and monstrous things and being tracked down and killed for it. Buy now at DriveThruRPG, post-mort.com or lulu.com.